was here we are, just sitting down talking about how religion has rejected us. Yeah. And hoping that others who have been rejected will have some safe place, a solace where they can come and they can listen and maybe rethink some of this religion. We're going to go over some of the what the fuck moments. And forgive me, WTF. I don't want to offend anybody, but what the fuck? Moments of religion, the contradictions, the things that just don't make any sense. And yet somehow we're supposed to fall in line and be just okay with that. Religion has shaped so much of the world that we live in today, for better, for worse, and sometimes it's just downright bizarre, right? Especially right now, Christianity has a lot to answer for in our country. Amen. I think it's time we really explore what's worth keeping, what's worth rethinking, and what's worth rejecting. In a previous life, I was an ordained minister for a denomination that will remain nameless for now. It was a very conservative, evangelical, Pentecostal, holy roller type of denomination. Yes, wow, laid hands on each other to pray. People got slayed in the spirit, all of the good stuff. I couldn't listen to music. I had to wear certain things, all that fun stuff.
Can I just ask, did you ever do snake handling?
No.
Okay.
No, but I know of people in our denomination that may have, like the far edges of it.
That's it.
I had heard, but I did not. No.
Did you have to wear skirts all the time?
No. It wasn't that bad.
Okay.
I didn't have to cover my heads. I didn't have to wear skirts.
Do you have the hair?
Oh, I had that because I'm from the 80s. So absolutely, I had poofy hair in the 80s. That's a great picture. Maybe we'll put that in. But yes, definitely had the poofy hair. Anyway, about 10 years ago, I was struggling with a lot of questions and seeing the Bible as having what I felt were contradictions. And I had a lot of concerns about my evangelical views at the time. As a female pastor, I had a tendency to be on the outs. Now, this is the interesting part, though. My denomination is actually started by a woman. And again, I'm not going to tell you the name of the denomination, but I'm going to leave enough breadcrumbs and clues that somebody could figure it out. Let's just be clear, there aren't a whole lot of them that were started by a woman. Yes. So, this particular denomination was started by a woman, an amazing, amazing woman who was also beautifully, and yes, I'm going to say this, beautifully and deeply flawed. But of course, we have to cover all that up because she has to be perfect. So this denomination started by a woman and quote unquote accepted, and I am air quoting for those listening, accepted me as a pastor as a woman because pastors were obviously allowed. We were started by a woman. But by the time I got around to this denomination, we were not necessarily appreciated or encouraged. So let me tell you this quick story just to give you an example. When my husband graduated Bible college, his graduating class had this amazing woman, and she was so smart, and she was the valedictorian. She was also married to a student. So these two students together, graduated and then went on to be pastors in the district that I was working in. And I remember doing a district mailing, and I remember seeing the label to this family, and it said Reverend and Mrs. And I was like, oh my God, maybe they don't know that she went to Bible college. Like, I don't know how they could know, but I guess she got missed. So I take it to the secretary, and I was like, she was the valedictorian of her class, right? I mean, she is a reverend. Why does the label not say that? And it was so weird because it was like, well, we just don't do that. And I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean you don't do that? Well, most women are the misses. I said, yeah, that's great, but she's not. And I was like, and it's a very easy kind of hack in your database. To this day, I still get mail from that denomination, and it still calls me a missus. Even though I was ordained, I was a reverend, I worked for it, I earned it.
Wow.
And it's just like, okay, so you can tell me all you want, that you believe in women in ministry and all of that stuff, but apparently you don't.
Yeah.
So now I'm out of all that denominational stuff, and I just am having a great time telling people about Jesus without a church, without a building, which I know we've talked about a lot.
Buildings.
Yes, the building.
Ah!
Pastor with a building is so much. But anyway, so I left that denomination. I didn't actually leave. They asked me to leave my building because they wanted it for other purposes. Because again, it wasn't really about me being a pastor. They didn't want me. They wanted my building, my properties, because everything was paid off. But the guy across town who had $1 million building, his wasn't paid off. But the female, she paid everything off. So they wanted it. Whatever. Anyway, I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter. We are going to do what I forgive us, right?
I think so. Eventually, I think we have to work up to it.
That way we wind up to work up. Anyway, so today I'm free of denominations. And as you know, I fell in touch with a guy named Alexander John Shaya, who wrote a book called Heart and Mind. And now I am one of his conveners, and I walk people through this book and this program that he has done, which has been amazing and transformational for so many people. And you can find him on 1,000 other podcasts.
So I'm Alicia, and I'm the pastor of Pikes Peak Metropolitan Community Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I grew up a Christian. We were the kind of family where we were at church every single Sunday. If we were traveling, we would visit a church in whatever town we were in. When I went to college, I majored in theology, and I discerned a call to ordained ministry. I grew up in the Lutheran Church, and I was part of a denomination that ordained women and had started ordaining women in the 70s. And my church in the 80s called a female pastor, which was really awesome. I went through the process to begin ordination through that denomination, and I got approved. And then I started seminary, and I came out my first year of seminary, which just threw a big wrench in my plans to be ordained. The denomination that I was a part of at the time would not ordain what they called practicing homosexuals. There's a lot of issues with that language. We can have a conversation about that language. That's a whole other podcast.
And practicing just means you couldn't date, or what? How does that work? What's practicing?
I think practicing really meant having sex.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any sort of sexual contact.
What about don't ask, don't tell? Like, were you able to share that you were, but stay celibate, or did they just not want to know?
No, if you promise to stay celibate, you could be ordained
Okay.
as a gay person,
Okay.
supposedly.
That's what they said.
Yeah. I decided that it was not the denomination's decision about whether I was going to be celibate or not. And I certainly knew that I couldn't spend my life in the closet. I knew that would be super damaging to me and any congregation that I served. So I left that church, decided to finish seminary, and then just kind of wandered around for a long time because I didn't know what to do with this calling that I had, and tried to find other churches that would ordain openly gay people. Anyway, I found my way to Metropolitan Community Churches, and I was ordained in MCC in 2010. I have wrestled with all kinds of questions, why even be Christian today? Why does it matter? Why not just let it go? Can you be a Christian and be LGBTQI2S+? So here I am today, a female queer pastor, making my way every day, just one question at a time, trying to figure things out and sharing what I've learned with other people.
So together, we're going to explore some pretty hot button topics, religious topics, and we're going to dig into like how they even came to be. You're going to help us with what you learned in seminary, all the big words that I don't understand. And I'm going to do my thing and tell you a story of how it got there because I love to tell stories. And just so everyone knows, this is not about bashing religion.
Yeah.
I mean, let me restate. It is about bashing religion, but it's not about bashing God because God and religion are two different things. And to be fair, there's a lot of religions, not just the ones that we came from, but other world religions that have shared some of the same beliefs that we struggled with. But God is loving and God's inclusive and God doesn't seem to hold to those what most religions call truths. And I think that's kind of what it is. So by curiosity, questioning, and finding meaning in God that actually works for people. We're not going to tell you people what to believe. Right? Right? That's not what we're about. Nope. We're just going to kind of lay everything on the table and then we're going to decide what we want to keep, what we want to rethink, and what we want to get rid of.
Yep.
Should we be reading the Bible literally, word for word, doing exactly what it says? Or was the Bible intended to be something else? Was it more allegorical? Was it metaphorical? How are we really supposed to read the word? And I just want to say, we're going to scratch the surface here.
Yes.
But for your base facts, the Bible is made up of a bunch of stories about people that they had heard or told each other about, things that had been carried along in their tribes, if you will, their cultures, things that they told each other to try to understand how they even got here. So a lot of these stories were just spoken word that got carried through to various people along the way. It was their understanding of God. And I think that's really, really important. I think a lot of people think that every single, story is something that was actually given by God to these people instead of saying, no, this was just Job's understanding of God. This is Esther's story of what happened to her. This is what happened with the kings. So it was not necessarily like verbatim, somebody kind of went into a trance and their arm just started writing and the whole room kind of glowed. That wasn't it.
Or was it?
Or was it? Okay, that's fair that we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, we haven't gotten there yet.
So apparently I'm already rejecting. The Bible, specifically the Hebrew Bible and all of that, is more like a library. It has history, it had prophecy, it has poetry, law, parables, all kinds of things. And the Hebrew people actually just kind of took this oral tradition, and it wasn't even written down until about like 1200 to 165 BCE. That's how long it took. They did not have pens and pencils readily available. And so therefore, that took a very long time. And then now we know too, like some of the Torahs that they wrote it on, some of the scripts, some of that was destroyed when the temples were destroyed.
Yes.
And we know that. So then they had to rewrite things, which is an interesting thing as well. The Bible is actually written historically. And when I say the Bible, I'm talking like the whole thing, both Old Testament and New Testament. So in this case, both the Old Testament and the New Testament is written in a lot of different languages. Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, because those were the predominating languages of those times and of those people. But the Bible has been translated over 900 times for English speakers and over 3,000 times for non-English speakers.
Wow.
And for a little bit more of a contemporary understanding for people, it's like, when we had to learn Shakespeare in high school. I had no idea what half of those things meant, and we didn't really understand. And so you can't just translate it. You have to really try to understand the culture, try to understand the sayings of the day. So the fact that it keeps getting retranslated too is a little bit of how far away have we gone from the original text?
And Shakespeare was English, just an older version, and it was the same language we still speak, and we still have such a hard time
Time understanding Shakespeare.
Okay. So when people say, I read the Bible or I follow the Bible literally, there's a lot of questions then to be asked. Because, if you really are going to say that, then are you wearing an outfit that has mixed materials? Because according to Exodus, I believe, you can't mix materials and wear that. Do you greet each other with a holy kiss when you walk in for a meeting, as is told by Peter? Are you doing those things? Because
That's a different kind of church than I've ever been to.
they don't greet each other with a holy kiss in your church.
Sounds like my kind of
I
place.
know, it might be more fun. We might want to try that. That's our next venture. Okay. So, and then you have another question like, okay, so you follow the Bible literally. Okay, but guess what? There's some Bibles that have 66 books in them, some that have 73, some that have 75, some that have 81. So, do you follow the ones that have all of them, the 81, or do you not? And why did you choose to say those don't work and that one doesn't? How do you do that? Because I don't know if you really can, especially in this day and age and in this culture. And that's the funny part. For me, it's like, so like, do you eat bacon? I mean, I know you don't.
I don't
Yes, I
anymore.
know you
No,
don't.
I know.
But like, I do. I absolutely do.
You're like, I love
And I'm gonna put it on all the stuff that's supposed to, you're not supposed to put it on. Shellfish, people do that. Like, why don't you take that part literally, but then you're gonna take something else that is actually really damaging and hurtful to people literally and hold it against them?
So one of the things that I think it's important to talk about is just kind of talking about our terminology here. And so when we're talking about reading the Bible literally, there's reading the Bible literally, and then there's also inerrancy and infallibility that can get kind of brought into this a lot of times. And
That's a lot of big words.
it is a lot of big words.
What else that mean for people like me?
Right. So I like what Marcus Borg, the amazing writer, thinker, teacher in so many ways, he talks about this as being a literal, factual understanding of the Bible. And so what that means is that in our modern times, if we use the word literal, a lot of times it ends up meaning factual or true. And he thinks that's an important distinction to make because that means that people who believe that the Bible is literally true, that read it in a literal, factual way, they believe that God created the world in 7 days. Eve really was created, and all subsequent women came from this, from Adam's rib in the Garden of Eden. Jesus walked on water. Jesus was born of a virgin woman. God parted the waters with the Red Sea. These things all literally and factually happened. And so that's where you get the people who are believing that, the world is only 5 or whatever, 7,000 years old.
Right.
And they take what the Bible says about timing literally. And so they've, gone back and like counted all the days and hours and years. That's how they've come up with that number. Inerrancy means that there's no mistakes. Infallibility is also part of that. That there are no mistakes in it. There's no contradictions in the Bible. And so sometimes those things all go together. But most of the time, people talk more about literally understanding the Bible. The other part that comes with reading the Bible in a literal, factual way is that people see the Bible then as the starting, middle point, and end point of all questions relating to life. It is the absolute authority for ethical issues, moral issues, spiritual issues. And so that's where so many of our cultural issues today come from, because different people read the Bible differently. And so people who have a literal, factual understanding of the Bible, say, well, this is what the Bible says, and so this is why I believe what I believe, because whatever the Bible says, that's what I believe. Right. So it's a one-to-one kind of equation. There's a few things that I wanted to kind of highlight as we think about the Bible. Where a long time, people weren't literate. So they couldn't even read. If there were printed copies of the Bible, each one had to be done individually. And, different people have different handwriting styles. I have terrible handwriting, and my kids always say they can't read it. So it's like, I can understand that there could be some issues in copying, different pieces of different books of the Bible. It used to be that each book of the Bible was its own scroll, or little codex is what they called them. And so paper was very expensive. People had to be of a certain social class to even be able to read. And so, if there were communities of faith, they would have copies, but they may not have copies of the whole Bible, only parts of the Bible, because again, it was all done by hand. Now, this all changed with the invention of the printing press. This is another bum,
Dum, bum, bum.
moment.
Yeah.
This was where, the Bible started to be more accessible to a lot more people. And it was cheaper, easier, faster to reproduce copies. And so people started making more copies of the Bible. More people were able to read them. Now, a debate back in the day during this time was, could the Bible be translated into a language? Because by this point, the Bible was all in Latin, and that was the holy language. There are still some churches today who only read these things from Latin because they believe that's the holy language. I do have a funny story about that, real quick. When I was pastoring, I had this lovely woman. She was much older. She had gone to church her entire life. And I remember discussing some of these things with her, and she looked at me, and I am not kidding you, dead in the face, and said, no, the only real translation is the King James Version. She honestly thought that the King James Version was what the Bible was written in, period. And I remember going, wow, I'm not doing well as a pastor, if that's what you think.
Jesus spoke King James English.
That's
yes,
right,
absolutely.
apparently.
Yeah. And so did King David and King Solomon and Esther. They spoke the King's English, huh? That's amazing. Yeah.
And that's what, so many people learn, and they think that that's what happens. So big thing that happened was, after the printing press became popular and people could make more copies of the Bible, people really started to believe that the Bible needed to be translated into the language of the people. And so, for example, Martin Luther translated the Bible into the German language so that German people could read the Bible and understand it in their own language. It's such a basic thing today, but it was revolutionary and is part of what triggered, it was a part of the whole process of the Protestant Reformation in the 1600s. I think that's a really huge moment, because that was the first time that people could really start hearing the Bible in their own language again, and being able to make their own decisions about how to interpret it. And of course, that just opened up Pandora's box.
Yes, it did.
Which, honestly, I'm glad it was opened. But that's, again, we'll get to that at the end of the podcast. Probably says a lot about who I am. But I just appreciate that, we have the ability to read the Bible in our own languages, in our own ways today. I think that's amazing.
Thank Thank you to Zebra Productions for providing the lights for this episode.
The other part that I wanted to highlight about biblical literalism is that it is a response to the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment was a time when all these scientific discoveries were happening. For example, people started discovering that the earth revolved around the sun and not the other way around. There's the whole discussion or debate about, is the earth round or flat? These kinds of these things were being discovered, and it messed with the worldview that they had from the Bible. And so as these discoveries were being made and people were having it kind of collide with their literal understanding of the Bible, it created a lot of conflict within churches and within the culture of the time, and that has continued until today. We see that all the time now.
Right. And I feel like that is like, to me, that is the big thing. We don't like change. People don't like change. Yes.
But the Bible, not that the Bible changes, but you can't look at it statically. Like it does change as our cultures, as our world, as discoveries change. If we look at it literally, that Adam and Eve were the only two people, and then they had a lot of children. Well, science now kind of disproves that in the royal family. Thank you so much. Because now we know that inbreeding is not good, and you can't survive. Now, there are people that will say, oh, but God, but then, God did it that way just because he needed to populate the earth. And now it doesn't work. But they did back then. And I'm like, really? So God changed it? Or is it that maybe our reading or our understanding, we now have science that tells us maybe that's not exactly what happened. And that's okay. Like for me, it doesn't change my relationship with God. Being able to see that this was just a way people tried to understand who God was and how we got here. I think the moment you take it literally, you get so rigid and static that you don't have any room to grow into a new idea or new thinking. Right. And I think part of what you're getting at is that there's ways to see the Bible in the context of its own time, understanding that who we are in this moment in time changes how we read it, and that the Bible can be understood metaphorically and not just literally. There are some parts of it that may literally, factually be true. At this point in time, it might be difficult to know exactly which parts those are. If we want to know exactly scientifically 100% sure that this, and this happened, the Bible is not a scientific treatise. It's not a history document. There are parts that try to answer important questions about things, that try to give a history of the people of Israel and the early movement, the people who followed Jesus. But they're not scientific documents. It's not like a reporter was there writing everything down and documenting it every single moment. They may get some of the facts wrong, but the overall story, the overall point of it is still true. I've tried to understand what is so appealing to that way of reading the Bible still today. And I think that there's a comfort to it because there's a certainty there that it's like, okay, this is how the world works. This is how we function within it. And there's a safety, there's a certainty there. As someone who is a woman called to a leadership position in the church, and as someone who's a lesbian, I already had issues. I ran into all kinds of problems. I went to a college where there were many people there who were parts of denominations that did not ordain women, did not think that women could be pastors. And so they would quote me the passages that said, women be silent in church. Women, your husband is the head of you, just as Christ is the head of the church. Women, cover your hair, all these things, and all the passages that get thrown out. And so I really had to wrestle with why would God call me to something that I was prohibited from being able to actually live out.
Exactly.
What kind of God is that?
Yeah, and my thing was, why then am I going to get quote unquote saved? Okay, why am I going to give my life to Jesus? You know, the one that I have to be obedient to somebody who didn't die on a cross for me. Like that was my always thing. I was like, I'm sorry, Jesus is the one that died for me. So if Jesus calls me to do something, hell yes, I'm gonna do it. And if my husband, thank God he would never, because he's wonderful. But if my husband said to me, you know, no, you can't, I'd be like, get behind me, Satan. Because, and that's my thing is like, I don't understand how women as a whole can say that they have to get this permission from their husband. Because I just want to say, that man did not die for you. Jesus did. Who is your allegiance to when you're quote unquote getting saved then? Like if you're going to give your heart to Jesus, give your whole heart to Jesus, not half of it. And the other half is to this, you know, guy who doesn't necessarily know. I mean, he could be very nice. I'm sorry. But you know what I'm saying.
Your husband's amazing.
I'm very lucky, which is why I can sit here and say this. Because I'm not going to get in trouble when I get home.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I always remember is Troy Pear, the founder of MCC. He said, God didn't create you just so that he would have someone to hate.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Because for so many people in the LGBTQI Two Spirit Plus community, it's like they're just automatically rejected from Christian community. And because of these literal factual readings of the Bible, you're just wrong. You are not able to be Christian. It's just not okay. You can't be a leader in church. You can't get married in our churches. You can't get baptized in our churches. You certainly can't raise your families in our churches. These sorts of things happen. And of course, here in Colorado Springs, we see so many young people getting kicked out of their families when they come out in whatever their gender identity or sexual orientation is, because their families have this literal, factual understanding of the Bible. And they're like, no, if you're going to claim that identity, then you are not part of us. And to me, that is the absolute opposite of who Jesus was and what the whole Christian message is all about.
Absolutely. And I always think about this idea that many Christians have that belief that it was, a man sitting at a table in a room and, when lights just start to glow and then his hand just starts to begin to flow in all of these stories. And of course, it was always a man, of course, never not a man. And so they really believe that a lot of these stories came from God himself through a vessel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a prevailing kind of idea. But there's not another idea that maybe it was just people's understanding of God. My favorite is always the rainbow. Like you read this story about Noah and this big flood, and he's got to build this thing because all of these people are bad, and he's got to get out of the way because they're all going to be destroyed. And in the end, a rainbow comes out, and the writers of that story decided that rainbow was because, God wanted to give him a sign that, oh, I'll never flood the earth again, which I have issues with. Like, if we really think about it, do we want to see a rainbow in the sky to remind us he won't kill us? I mean, it's a fair question. That's a whole nother podcast.
And the rainbow comes after all those people were killed.
Right, exactly.
And not just people, but all the animals. And
I just always feel like instead of seeing that literally, that's what it was, as read from those stories, it's more of just people trying to understand what is this that's now in the sky, because they didn't have the scientific understanding to say, oh no, a rainbow is just light refracted through, water. And that's what a rainbow, because it had been raining and then the sun came out. And so now there's a rainbow. And so things like that, there are people that still honestly believe that is what the rainbow is, instead of seeing as, well, like, let's take a look back, because they didn't have all this information. So they had to make up something to tell people. And for the most part, I do think a lot of stories, and I do think that literalism can, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, but it can be used as a way to keep people in line, keep them scared.
It's true. It's a form of control.
Should we take the Bible literally? Do you reject it?
We've kind of given it away a little bit, I think.
To the whole thing. Absolutely. My feeling, I definitely reject
Biblical literalism.
Yeah.
I say no to biblical literalism.
and I agree. I also reject it because I just think it's so harmful. Just so harmful. And my litmus test is always, when it comes to God, if everyone's included, I'm in. If anyone is excluded, I don't think it's God, personally. That's my litmus test.
That's awesome. I love that. That's amazing.
Okay, if you enjoyed this, subscribe to The Religious Rejects wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have questions, stories, or ideas for future episodes, send them our way. We'd love to hear from you.
If you're nice.
Be nice.
I said, we'd love to hear from you if you're nice.
If you're nice, yes.
No trolls. So thanks for joining us on this adventure. Remember, it's okay to ask questions.
And the biggest idea that we're rejecting here is that you have to have it all figured out.
See you next time, friends.